Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the presentation of the first Reform Rabbi, Gilad Kariv, elected to the Knesset. Stephen, do you want to continue with the introduction? Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
I'm delighted to do the introduction today and feel very honored to welcome to us Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who was born and educated in Tel Aviv. His involvement with the Reform movement in Israel began in high school when he joined the Beit Daniel synagogue in Tel Aviv. Rabbi Kariv served in the Israel Defense Forces Intelligence Corps under the Haman Talpiot program, and following 5 years of service, during which he completed the office program with honors, he went on to study at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In 2001, he earned a bachelor's degree in law and Jewish studies. In 2001 and 2002, he interned in the Supreme Court of the State Attorney Office, and in 2003, he received a master's degree in Jewish studies at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. In 2008, Rabbi Kariv received a master's degree in constitutional law from Northwestern University in Chicago through a combined program with Tel Aviv University. Between 2003 and 2009, Rabbi Kariv served as the director of the Israel Religious Action Center and headed the Reform Movement's public and legal initiatives in Israel on issues of freedom of religion and relations between religion and state, conversion, and many other social causes. In 2009, he was appointed the executive director of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism, and he served in that capacity until he was elected to the Knesset on a Labour Party ticket at the beginning of 2021. We are delighted and honored to welcome him, and we thank him for joining us from Israel.
So, shalom, chaverim and chaverot, dear friends. Good morning still to you all in St. Louis. Thank you, dear Stephen, for the invitation to present you some thoughts about the current situation in Israel and to address your questions. It's first of all, I want to apologize for the fact we had to postpone this event a few times due to political challenges we experienced in Israel, and I'm glad that finally we can have this meeting and presentation. And it's a wonderful opportunity for me to thank you, Stephen, for your long-standing friendship, and for the fact that you were the one that actually brought me to St. Louis. And you invited me in your former capacity as one of the leaders of the Federation. And thank you for enabling me to meet the wonderful congregation, the wonderful community, Jewish community of St. Louis. Unfortunately, we are using the Zoom in order to meet, but I can promise you that next time I'm in the States, I'll come and visit again your community. So look, dear friends, I want to share with you a few thoughts about the current political situation in Israel, to share a few remarks about the situation with the Western Wall Agreement and other issues around this field of religion and state, and then mainly to leave time for your questions, and I will be more than glad to address them. A week ago, we celebrated a 6 months anniversary, if we can say, for the establishment of the new Israeli government. And I would like to suggest that having a functioning government and a functioning coalition for itself is an important achievement, because unfortunately in the last 3 years, the Israeli political system was extremely unstable. And as all of you or most of you know, during the 2 years of the pandemic, unfortunately, the citizens of Israel went to the polls not less than 4 times. The Israeli democracy is holding a different structure and mechanism than the American system of democracy. And unfortunately, like in some European democracies, we had to go again and again to the polls. And this fact by itself reflected the lack of political stability in Israel for many reasons. And after extremely complicated 2 years, in which, for example, Israel didn't have an annual national budget. As a result of this lack of stability, 6 months ago we succeeded to establish a coalition and the government. This coalition enjoys a very slim majority in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, 61 votes out of 120. More than that, this is an extremely diverse and ideologically wide government that includes not less than eight different parties. But in spite of its complexity, this government in the last 6 months succeeded, I believe so, as a member of the coalition, to stabilize the political system, to approve a national budget for 21 and for next year, 2022, and mainly to deal with some burning issues, including the pandemic and a fourth wave of the pandemic. Now, as I said, this government by far is the most diverse government we ever had in Israel. Not only we have 8 different parties in the government, none of those parties has more than 17 seats in the parliament. The Prime Minister himself, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, is leading a party that enjoys only 6 seats in the Israeli parliament. It is a government that starts in the deep Israeli right. The Prime Minister is a modern Orthodox Jew that a few years ago headed the council of the Jewish settlements in Judea and Samaria. And in that regard, as I said, is coming from the deep Israeli right and from the heart of the Israeli settlements movement. And this government ends not only with the left wing Zionist parties like my party, the Labour Party, and Meretz. It includes also, for the first time in the history of the State of Israel, an Arabic Israeli party, which by definition is not a Zionist party. This government includes parties that have a huge difference or a huge gap between their social and economic philosophies, right and left, deep right and left, also around issues of economy and welfare. This coalition and this government is extremely diverse also from a religious perspective. It doesn't include the ultra-Orthodox parties, but it includes a modern Orthodox party, the party of the Prime Minister. The Arabic Party identifies itself as a religious Islamic party. And at the same time, we have parties that are fully identified with secular Jewish agenda, like the party that represent the Russian-speaking Israelis, led by the finance minister, Avigdor Lieberman, or Meretz, the left-wing party that is holding an extreme liberal and progressive positions over issues of religion and state. And this diversity, by definition, creates both political challenges, and it also, by definition, prevents the government from addressing some of the most burning and important issues, like the conflict with the Palestinians. It is clear that a national unity government that starts with the settlement movements and ends with an Arabic Palestinian Israeli party will not be able to move forward either with annexation of the territories or a two-state solution. And in that regard, there are Israelis that say, well, we have a government that can't basically move either to the right or to the left. But at the same time, and this is one of the reasons why I'm a member of the coalition and why my party joined, at the same time, I would like to suggest the following. After those shaky years of Israeli politics, during which the flames of the political, social, and ideological dispute inside the Israeli society, this government is not only a political necessity. We had to bring together or to assemble at least 61 mandates, and that what we succeeded to do. That is what we succeeded to do. This government and this coalition represent also an Israeli attempt to reconcile the different Israeli communities and sectors, and to lower down some of those flames that I mentioned. And I think that as Americans, and again, I'm not an American citizen, I don't see myself as an expert for American politics, but I think that in many ways, Israelis and Americans experienced in the last years this troubling situation that slowly or rapidly we are losing our social and civil common ground that allow us to have major disputes and major disagreements while remembering that we are all committed to this important task of strengthening our country and working for its well-being. And we in Israel, many of us felt a real threat to the ability of the Israeli society to hold its common ground. And I don't want to judge former Israeli leaders. It is clear, once I'm a member of the Labour Party, it is clear that I didn't support the former Prime Minister Netanyahu as one of the leaders of the reform movement. I had a major clash with him as a representative of the movement once he pushed aside the Kotel agreement that he himself originally presented because of the pressure of the ultra-Orthodox parties. But I really don't want to address the role of a specific leader in that regard. I think that the Israeli society faced a challenge of losing this common ground, and the current government, in a way, is giving an answer to this challenge, reminding us all that in spite of the huge dispute between myself and my colleague from the right-wing parties that are in the coalition in regard to the future solution, or the possibility of having a future political solution with the Palestinians, we still have a very wide common ground, which is critical and important. And in that regard, the pandemic and those extremely challenging 2 years of facing a major health crisis that goes much beyond issues of health and the way to address the pandemic from a scientific perspective. And we all know that this pandemic is pushing up, or is placing on the surface many social issues and ideological disputes, especially because of the pandemic. I think that this government is holding the ability to address some of the most important internal challenges of the Israeli society. I do want, I will mention two more things. One has to do with the relations between the Jewish majority and the Arab minority inside Israel. And second, I'll address the issue of religion and state and the issue of the Western Wall, and then we will open the floor for your questions. Part of this social tension that grew up, or became more and more disturbing in recent years, part of it was the growing tension between Jews and Arabs inside Israel. And I'm reminding us all that today in Israel, we have almost 8 million citizens that speak Hebrew, and 1.5, 1.8 million citizens that speak Arabic. And we're talking about sovereign Israel. I'm not counting the Palestinians of the territories. And unfortunately, for different reasons, there was and there is a serious national and ideological and social tension between those two communities, and we saw it a few months ago during the last military operation in the Gaza border, when we saw also clashes inside mixed Jewish and Arabic cities inside sovereign Israel. The fact that we have today an Arabic party inside the coalition, the fact that some of the Knesset committees are led by Arabic Israeli politicians, and the fact that the current government built or developed a multi-year strategic program to close the social gaps between the Jewish communities and the Arab communities in Israel, and to promote the social and economic involvement of the Israeli Arab citizens. This is, for me, a profound political, democratic, and Jewish achievement. And I want to emphasize that from my perspective as a rabbi in Israel, it's not only a key element in strengthening the Israeli democratic values, it is also a key element in promoting the just and wise understanding of what it means to have a sovereign Jewish state. That we are committed to to promote civil equality between Jews and non-Jews inside sovereign Israel, as we carry in our minds and hearts the painful lessons of the history of the Jewish people. And in that regard, it's important to say it's going to be a process. It's not something that we can achieve overnight, but I'm glad to say that this government by far is the most serious Israeli government we ever had in facing this challenge of the growing tension between Jews and Arabs inside Israel. The other remark I want to say, and I will end with it, has to do with issues of religion and state. And here, as Stephen presented me, I am the first non-Orthodox rabbi ever serving the Israeli parliament. I cannot, unfortunately, I cannot share with you that I was warmly welcomed by the ultra-Orthodox Knesset members. Unfortunately, they continue to boycott me. They leave the plenary whenever I'm called to speak, and this is definitely an unpleasant and negative and disturbing phenomena. But at the same time, I think that in a very profound way, the voice of the different Jewish denominations and different Jewish communities is heard today in the Israeli parliament in the most profound way than ever. And in that regard, I also want to mention that one of my colleagues in the coalition is not a rabbi, but is one of the leading lay leaders of the Israeli conservative movement. So truly today we have all Jewish denominations and communities represented in the Israeli parliament: ultra-Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism, of course, secular Jews that are the majority in Israel. Now, again, this government is not a government of rapid revolutions. This is a government of slow and careful evolution. And in that regard, again, unfortunately, we will not be able to achieve through this government, for example, a civil track for marriage and divorce. Israel is the only democracy in the Western world that doesn't have a civil track for marriage and divorce. And all the procedures of domestic law, or most procedures of domestic law, are done in rabbinical courts. And this is definitely a reality we need to change. It goes directly against the concept of gender equality, of freedom of religion, and other fundamental constitutional democratic values. And unfortunately, we have a modern Orthodox party in the coalition, and they are not yet in a position of promoting this important cause. But at the same time, definitely this is a government which is not willing to maintain a language of discrimination or inciting language, or how to say, negative policies towards different Jewish communities. This government is committed to support the growth of the non-Orthodox communities in Israel. For the first time, this government is about to establish a new unit of the government that will work with the non-Orthodox movements, that will promote cultural Jewish programs and operations that are not identified or affiliated with Orthodox Judaism. And in that regard, definitely we see important progress. In regard to the Kotel, this is still, how to say, an issue that brings many emotions to the political arena, and there is a huge struggle or a huge effort from the side of the ultra-Orthodox parties to prevent the implementation of the agreement over an egalitarian worship platform in the Kotel. Here I'm glad to say that the current government is committed to push forward this agreement. It will not be done through how to say vocal public declarations because of the political tension with the ultra-Orthodox community. But I can tell you from being inside, the room in that regard, that after 5 years of disconnection between the Israeli government and the leadership of the egalitarian non-Orthodox communities in the US or in North America, the current government, the current prime minister renewed the ongoing dialogue on a weekly basis. And I strongly believe that in the next few months, we'll see that work is being done on the ground, that this government is pushing forward the different elements of the Kotel agreement, again, without big titles and headlines, but with real facts. So in that regard, you are meeting, my friends, an optimistic Israeli politician, which is at the same time extremely realistic politician, in the sense that I know that not all of my dreams will be met by the new government, and this government is not close to solve all the major issues that we are confronting, that we are have to confront with today in Israel. But I think that this government is replacing Israel on a much more stable path. And in that regard, I can say that I'm quite optimistic. And with this notion, I'll end my remarks, and I'll be happy to address your questions if you have things to raise or issues to raise.
If you'd like to raise your hand or type in the chat box. Yes, Marilita? You need to unmute.
How is the growth of the reform movement in Israel?
So first of all, shalom, Marlita. Thank you for your question. I had the privilege, as Stephen presented, I have the privilege to lead the Israeli reform movement in the last 12 years till I was elected to the Knesset. And I'm glad to share with you that also through the kind support of your Jewish Federation and the commitment of the reform communities in your great city, we were able in the last decade to double the number of Israeli reform congregations, to double the number of Israelis that are being ordained for a reform rabbinate. We established many fruitful or successful educational operations throughout the country. And when Stephen first met me in St. Louis, I shared with him that my vision is that in each of the Israeli Jewish cities across the country, there will be at least one well-established community center and congregation which is egalitarian and inclusive. It can be reform or conservative, and we are moving towards implementing this dream. I think that we are facing another decade of real growth, and with this current government, it will be done also with the blessing and the support of not only North American Reform and Conservative Jews, but also with the support of the Israeli government.
Shulamit Thinker has a question that she typed in the chat. Is there ever protection for female worship on Rosh
Kodesh.
Hadesh without
Yes.
violence and harassment? And what can we see and when? And Shulamit, if you want to unmute yourself, you can as well.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
Shulamit, you are of course referring to the sacred work of the women of the wall that in a very brave manner are coming every Hebrew first day of the month, or every first day of the Hebrew month, are coming to the Western Wall for a service, for a female of a service, if we can say. The Western Wall Agreement is aimed also to create a respectful, welcoming, recognized platform for the women of the wall. The same platform we are talking about, a platform that will serve the non-Orthodox community. Once it is established in a formal and respectful manner, this will be also the place of this important and brave group of women. Till then, they are the ones that are leading the battle for us in the women's section of the existing platform. Unfortunately, for many months, they suffered from violence. This situation, in a way, continues, but I can share with you that with the new government and with the Homeland Minister, the new Homeland Minister that comes from my party, we see in the last 2 months serious steps by the police to prevent the violence. And I'm not satisfied yet with the situation, but I do see some progress in protecting the right of this sacred group to worship. We are working with the Homeland Security Minister to make sure that things will become much better than they are today. It is not something that we can accept anymore.
Lydia,
I witnessed
go ahead. I'm sorry.
personally the harassment and the violence. And month after month, I thought, where are the police? And I'm a citizen too. Don't I get to worship? I'm a female. I'm in the women's section. How I worship is my business with Hashem. And so I have to just say it because I know everybody understands, but enough must speak.
I fully embrace your remark here. I think this is one of the most important battles or efforts we are leading today in Israel. It goes much beyond the specific issue of worship.
Right.
Worshipping next to the Western Wall. Again, the two good pieces of news is this government is committed to build this respectful, recognized, well-established, egalitarian worship platform. And second, and B, the police is being ordered today to take the necessary steps to guard the women of the wall. And I truly hope that terrifying scenes that we saw till few months ago will not repeat.
Thank you. Call
Lin-
two.
Thank
Lin-
you.
Linda Lieberman, do you want to ask your question? You have your hand up.
Yes. I'm curious how aligned your reform movement is with the reform movement in the United States, and particularly on the issue of a two-state solution or expanding of territories. It seems sometimes I get the impression that some reform leaders in the United States almost don't even care if there's a specific country called Israel, just as long as we can live there or something like that. But, I could be wrong, but sometimes I get that impression. But so how closely aligned are you with the reform movement in the United States, and what is your party's view on the solution for the Palestinian problem or issue?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say that when it comes to the Israeli reform movement, we are extremely close to our colleagues and counterparts in North America, and the relations are close, and the joint work on different issues is actually on a daily basis around issues like the Western Wall, the status of Reformed Jews, the ability of Jews by choice from all denominations to come to Israel, to immigrate to Israel, to make aliyah, also in regard to the relations between the Israeli administration and the American administration. The two movements are holding not only the same position, but are working together to secure those relations. When it comes to the issue of the conflict with the Palestinians, here there is a difference. In the end, for most North American Reform Jews, their affiliation with the Reform congregation, the fact that they are part of the North American Reform movement, this is their major platform of Jewish life. And that is why the North American Reform movement always supported the two-state solution as a formal position. And the North American Reform movement, I think in a way it's also the same case with the conservative movement, always held a clear and a formal position in that regard. The Israeli movement has a different policy. Here in Israel, in order to be active in this important arena of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and possible future solutions, you don't need to do it through your Reform congregation or your affiliation with Reform institutions. I'm a member of a party, many others are involved in political bodies. There are civil society organizations that are dealing with this issue. And this is why the Israeli Reform movement as a movement is less involved in this field. And we are working out to keep the doors of our Batei Knesset, of our synagogues and congregations wide open to Israelis from all political affiliations. Okay? Now, when it comes to my party, the Labour Party supports the two-state solution. We strongly believe that in order to keep Israel a homeland of the Jewish people, and in order to keep Israel as a vibrant democracy, we need to separate ourselves from the Palestinians and to enable the Palestinians to manifest and to realize their national right for self-determination. And in that regard, we see the political solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as the solution we need to promote. At the same time, I must be honest, it doesn't look that this political solution is around the corner, And it looks like that the two nations, both Israelis and Palestinians, lost the confidence that a political solution can be reached, and mainly lost the feeling or the belief that there is a reliable partner on the other side. And because this is the current situation, we need to understand that in order to promote a political solution to the conflict, we need right now mainly to do two things. One, we need to make sure that we don't create obstacles for a future political solution. And in that regard, I mainly mean a wide expansion of the settlements. Some growth always occurs because, you know, family enlarge themselves, children want to establish their house one day, marry, and have children. Sometimes they want to live next to their parents. So there is what we call natural growth. But there is a difference between slow natural growth and a rapid and direct expansion of the settlements by the government, and the Labour Party is not willing to accept this expansion. Definitely, we are not willing to talk about annexation, and this government will not promote any annexation plan or a dramatic expansion of the settlements. The second thing we need to do is to slowly rebuild the confidence, the mutual confidence, by identifying new generation of leaders, by cultivating relations, by creating a more peaceful atmosphere, by pushing aside the extreme forces. And when we're doing it, although, of course, we need to remember that still we, as Israelis, we are dealing with the threat of terrorism. It's not that that Palestinian terror as a phenomena disappeared. But on our one hand, although with our one hand, we need to block Palestinian terror, but with our other hand, we need to promote dialogue and create a new understanding with the more moderate Palestinian leaders and communities, and this is the philosophy of the Labour Party. I hope I succeeded to address the question.
Yeah, that was an excellent answer. Thank you very much.
Lenny, you want to unmute?
Thank you, Rabbi, for being with us this morning. I'm getting messages of low bandwidth, so this may be a problem. I don't know, but I've heard predictions that the religious parties are not going to want to stay outside the government; that they're going to want to join the government. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, and how that will change what the current government is doing if, in fact, they, in essence, kind of give up on Netanyahu and join the current government.
Well, thank you for this question. Right now, I don't see reasonable, rapid, or a reasonable political scenario of a rapid move of the ultra-Orthodox parties towards joining the coalition. They are still holding their political convent or strong ties with the former Prime Minister Netanyahu. It doesn't look that they are changing their political flavor. The more, how to say, inclusive character of the current government stands against their desire to keep the ultra-Orthodox dominance in the religious establishment. So I don't think it's a reasonable option in the near future. But as you know, it's not a wise thing to do to give political prophecies in Israel. So I'm willing to say that I don't see it as a real option in the near future. What happens in 2023? Who knows when it comes to Israel? Allow me to say that there is a very good chance that if they are in the coalition, I'm in the opposition. So it's not something that I'm working day and night to promote. So, and you know, in the end, being in the opposition is also something that you need to experience as a politician in a sophisticated democracy. So let the ultra-Orthodox parties enjoy the taste of opposition for a few years, and then they are welcome to come back to the government.
Al has a question.
Thank you, Rabbi. Not a question, a comment. First of all, congratulations on your election to your office. I think your discussion was terrific. I love your analysis of a slow, careful evolution, and I would hope that you and the Merowitz Center can establish some regular updates and follow-up discussions with you so we can continue hearing your viewpoint of what's going on. And thank you again.
Of course, thank you, and I'll be glad to stay in touch in that regard.
Do we have some more questions? Yes, Steve?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi, for coming and speaking to us today. I came in a little late, so you may have addressed some of my concerns here, and I guess one of my main concerns is with Iran. The Iranian government has stated many, many times that they want to blow Israel off this planet. Iran controls Hamas and Hezbollah. They provide them with armaments, missiles, now probably drones, and they are at the present time enriching uranium up to at least 60%. And some reports that I've read said that they could have a nuclear weapon within a very short time. As long as they are in control of the armies in both Gaza and the West Bank, and they do not want peace, they want to destroy Israel and destroy the Israeli people. And if they do, and if it's through Israeli intelligence that they are extremely close to having a nuclear weapon, how does Israel deal with that, and do they have a choice?
So first, thank you for your question. First, and I'm sure you agree with me, that Iran is not only a domestic challenge of Israel. The Iranian regime is threatening the stability of the entire region. And in many ways, it is threatening also the stability of many countries outside the region. And one of the important elements of the Israeli policy in that regard is, on the one hand, to do the things we need to do as a state and as a country which is committed to defend its citizens, and at the same time, to make sure we are supporting the creation of wide international coalition that is working against the attempts of the Iranian regime inside the region and outside the Middle East. And this is a very delicate balance. it requires a very close relations with the American administration and a very deep cooperation with the American administration, and I hope and I believe that we have them today as we had them in the past. It is important to say that there is a huge difference between the influence of the Iranian regime on the Gaza Strip and Hamas, the terror organization, and their influence on the Palestinian Authority and on the reality in the West Bank. And the Palestinian Authority is definitely not tuned to Tehran. And in that regard, the policy of my party, and I think this is the more, the wiser policy, is to differentiate Hamas from the Palestinian Authority, and to make sure that while we stand forcefully vis-a-vis the Hamas and the other Iranian ambassadors in the region, like Hezbollah, we cultivate the relations with the Arabic states, the Arab states that oppose Iran, and also those Palestinian players that oppose Iran, mainly the Palestinian Authority. And I think this is the policy of the current government. Israel will have to make sure that Iran is not reaching a nuclear capacity. And we need mainly to do it through international efforts and pressure, and also by the independent means of Israel.
Do we have any more questions? Stephen, do you have anything you'd like to add?
It doesn't appear that there are any more questions, but I want to
You're having a little bit of a...
say on behalf of the Mirror to thank you on behalf of everyone for joining us today from Israel and sharing your insights and your knowledge and your experience with us. And on a personal note, it's very comforting and reassuring to know that someone like you, with the values that you hold and articulate, are serving in the parliament of the Israeli state. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for what you're doing. And Kol Tov. Thank you.
Thank you, dear friend Stephen, and thank you all for finding the time to have this discussion. And I look forward towards my future visits to St. Louis.
Thanks,
Thank
Rabbi.
you so much.
Thank you. Shabbat
Kol Tov
Shalom.
Shalom.
Toda rabba, להתראות.
Shabbat Shalom.